Habeeb Akande is a published author and independent filmmaker. He has recently produced a documentary film project about what it means to be black and Muslim in Brazil. The documentary will explore the concepts of blackness and the rising black consciousness in Brazil as a movement, and paying particular attention to the northeastern Brazilian city of Salvador in the state of Bahia. Here's a short snippet of the documentary.
Transamérica Esportes, falando muito de seleção brasileira de futebol internacional, com a produção de Daniel Santa Rosa e com o comando técnico.
Bahia is good. We like the Nigeriano, we like Angolano, Africano. It's the prima facie in Brazil, Salvador. And it's the people, black people.
Vindo a Salvador.
Olá, boa tarde. Me chamo Priscila, trabalho aqui no Pelourinho, sou a baiana mais linda aqui desse Pelourinho. Arrasou pra caralho!
My name is Leilane, venha conhecer o Pelourinho.
Olá, meu nome é Jane, tenho 26 anos e vou fazer parte do documentário de Habeeb.
Olá, me chamo Leilane Dardo, sou daqui de Salvador, Bahia, tenho 27 anos, faço parte da presidência do documentário do Habeeb.
Lá, tenho 23 anos e vou participar do documentário de Habeeb.
Eu me chamo Pamela, tenho 22 anos e vou fazer parte do documentário do Habeeb.
Eu sou Bárbara, tenho 24 anos e estou fazendo parte do documentário de Habeeb. Nós somos do Fit Dance.
Quando me veio pros braços, me deu um sorriso. Sou eu, negro lindo, apresentando aqui o documentário do meu amigo e parceiro Habeeb. Tamo junto, London, Brasil, todo nosso.
Boa noite, meu nome é Anete Freitas, eu sou de Salvador, Bahia. Minha cor é morena. Aqui no Brasil não existe só negros e brancos, existem várias cores devido à nossa miscigenação. Nós temos...
So there's a really huge job to do here that is get people conscious about what this race is, and we have to fight that. We have to fight because it's our lives.
No, I embrace Islam. I'm a Muslim for 5 years now. I'd like to follow the principles of the values, the principles of freedom, liberty, and because of that I converted them.
Meu nome é Arivaldo, eu sou negro daqui de Salvador, Bahia, e creio que a maioria da população aqui, de 87% de afro-brasileiro.
It makes you want to learn Portuguese and go in Brazil and be with the people over there. So, but here in the studio has joined us the man himself, Habeeb Akande. Thank you very much indeed for that. That must have been a fascinating journey that you took out there, and you've come back with a whole book on it. And tell us what really infused you. What was the motivation behind doing that journey?
It's really a case of telling our story. I mean, I think Brazil is probably one of the few countries around the world which captivates the imaginations of so many people, whether they're Muslim, non-Muslim, black, white, male or female. And that was the case for myself when I first went there in 2014. One thing I did notice when I first went out in 2014 was the status of many of the Afro-Brazilians. Unfortunately, many of the Afro-Brazilians occupy a lot of the menial jobs. They're in obviously because of the socio-economic condition. Obviously, they're in the impoverished areas, and also in terms of obviously not only the condition that they're in, trying to understand their history because they've got a very rich history, even from probably the Islamic perspective as well. The influence that many African Muslims have had in current-day Brazil, and obviously helped to build the country what it is today.
Well, Habeeb, we get this idea that Brazil is a very integrated society. People of different hues, different colours, and Brazil is, in a sense, it's about that kind of harmony which reflects the colour and the of the country. And indeed, when we watch football, if we take that small example, you saw all different types of people playing in the game. But you're saying to me that that's not really the case. Is there some things we don't know about going on there?
Yeah, I mean, the picture that is painted to Brazil about, again, the football, and obviously, like you said, it's a multicultural country where there's people of all various ethnicities, and most people are of mixed heritage. But I would say Brazil is a wonderful country, it's a beautiful country, but it's a country of contradictions. And what I mean by that is the image and the perception of racial democracy, which was this perception that was propagated towards its 1930s. That's really a myth. This idea that in Brazil there's no such thing as racism because everyone is, jolly and happy and, like you mentioned, harmonious. That's for show. But in reality, especially if you're of African descent or if you've got visible African features, you experience racism and discrimination as much as you probably would discriminate. You feel racism and discrimination in America or like countries like South Africa, where we know the history of racism. Whereas Brazil, people somehow think that it's a kind of paradise for black people. It's probably somewhat of a paradise if you're white, if I'm honest. But if you're black, you feel the harsh realities of racism and racial discrimination.
So in a sense, there are the same kind of race consciousness movements in Brazil as there have been in the United States and to some extent in the UK. Is that the picture? Are people getting more conscious about who they are and their identity as black Brazilians?
Yeah, I mean, it's starting in terms of the black consciousness movement. It's probably started in the last maybe 20 to 30 years, whereas obviously in America that's always been an issue. And I think one of the problems, there's a lot of similarities as well as differences between the racial history of, for example, America and Brazil. Obviously America, we know of the Jim Crow laws and the segregation and things like that. So because there was clear segregation, black people had to unite and you could say fight racism and white supremacy. Whereas in Brazil, because there was a lot of relations between the European slave masters and their slaves, the indigenous Brazilians and black African Brazilian women as well. And obviously because obviously due to relations, obviously there was a lot of mixed offspring. People somehow think that there's no such thing as racism, but still, despite that, most people were mixed. The people that were, like I said, of clear African visible features and African descent, they were treated differently, even though they were part of the same family. So you find even amongst Brazilians, there's people of different ethnicities, but the people that look more European, shall we say, they'll be treated much more better and there'll be more opportunity.
So in terms of the documentary itself, I mean, these are amongst the themes. What are the other themes you're trying to address in that documentary?
The main theme I wanted to address, like you mentioned earlier in the programme, is what it's like to be black and Muslim. Not only being black, because obviously there's a black identity, obviously the Muslim identity, because obviously Islam is growing in Brazil as well. But what I wanted to do was, and you saw in the quick trailer, is to interview Brazilians themselves and for them to talk about their experiences rather than obviously me as an outsider talking about, because obviously I'll be honest, the first time I went I was like, wow, this country's amazing and things like that, there's no such thing as racism. And then after a while, because I've been 4 times, you see the reality and we actually speak to people. So when you get away from the main tourist attractions and where everyone's naturally jolly and being nice to you because obviously you're a foreigner. When I went, again, I think it was probably maybe my second visit, and then obviously I was dressed casually and things like that, and when I went to Bahia, which is in northeastern Brazil, 80% of the inhabitants are of African descent, so you see people that look like you and I in Brazil. So when I'm just going about my business, I saw the treatment I was receiving, especially when I went to, for example, my hotel, that people thought, okay, what's this guy doing here? He's probably from the favela. It's only when I opened my mouth, they realised I was a foreigner, then I was treated differently. And I had that same experience when I was in Egypt as well. Unfortunately, so this issue of racism and denying racism, unfortunately, is something which happens in Brazil, like unfortunately it does in many multicultural Muslim communities. So there was a lot of similarities that I found in terms of my experiences of racism and how people like to deny racism, unfortunately, in the Muslim community, like they do in
And like anywhere else, racism, that does affect life chances. It does affect the kind of conditions that you live in. Is that the case in Brazil as well?
Yeah, most definitely. It affects your job prospects. people develop was inferiority complexes because, you know, they're dark in complexion or they're of African descent, so they want to deny their Africanness, and obviously it affects obviously even women's self-esteem, and that's why there's a growing like black consciousness movement and black beauty movement where women are trying to celebrate their God-given features and things like that. So the issue of racism is not just and like it touches upon so many levels: socio-economic, obviously, job, which is like I mentioned earlier, self-esteem, and obviously misconceptions as well. That's the thing. And obviously, in Brazil, we know of the recent, you know, Black Lives Movement, which is happening in America. In Brazil, it was far worse. You know, like in Rio, for example, there's studies that have come out that show that, unfortunately, Brazil police in Rio kill six black young men a day, on average.
Six black men a day?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's more young black people killed in Brazil than there is in America, but like 3 times more black people are killed in Brazil than there is in America. And I'm not trying to say that what's going on in America shouldn't be publicised. We shouldn't, you know, protest and things like that. But very few people know what's going on in Brazil, and it's even worse.
Well, what about the black Brazilians themselves? I mean, in terms of the mobilisation.
Yeah, well, the thing is because of Brazil's history, and again, like I mentioned earlier, most Brazilians are of mixed race heritage. Many black Brazilians don't identify themselves as black, but that's changing now, because obviously it's easier, rather than calling yourself a black person like negro, they'll maybe say I'm moreno, which is like a brown person. It's like because even to call yourself black previously was seen as like an insult. So people would try and say, you know, they're brown or they're a chocolate colour, all types of, and like there was a study that was carried out in terms of like a census asking people to just identify themselves in terms of their race and skin tone. And the people gave about 130 different responses. And these were all non-white responses to say, I'm a chocolate brown, I'm a mahogany brown, I'm this, I'm that.
There's even a town which is named, was it India or something like that, that kind of indicates the differences of how people feel about that?
Yeah, I've kind of, I forgot the name escapes me, but I've heard about that as well. I've heard about that. But it's growing, like the black consciousness movement, despite, and this is something also I wanted to celebrate the achievements that, and the achievements that black Brazilians are making, and also to celebrate the history. I didn't want to just focus on poverty and what's going on in favelas and things like that. I wanted to talk about, yes, a lot of black Brazilians or Afro-Brazilians are in difficult situations, but how they're overcoming this as well. And just to educate people, and because even the misconception that people have about Brazil is inaccurate, that I've found, especially when I speak to people in this country.
Now, recently, of course, we're in the throes of the Olympic Games now, of course. You know, there's a spotlight on Rio. And we understand that there was an area where there were mass graves that were found. Tell us a little bit about that. What were those graves and what did they signify?
The Olympic, where a number of the world journalists are staying, in Rio, that was built. It was built a couple of years ago, but it was built on a mass grave site of enslaved Africans, and not only that, they've gentrified the area where a lot of the Afro-Brazilians was obviously staying in areas where the stadiums are, where the games are being held. They've been kicked out.
So they've been
kicked out,
uprooted from their homes.
Yeah, and they've changed the area. They've now made the Olympics, you know, like a tourist attraction, or where the games are being held. But loads of residents or Afro-Brazilians, they can't benefit from the games, and obviously the tourists that are coming and things like that. So it's like the face that Brazil shows for the public is everyone happy, joyous and things like that, like we've seen in football and things like that. But the reality, especially if you're of African descent, is totally different. So that's why when we're talking about Brazil, I would say there's 2 Brazils, and again, it depending on what you look like will determine your experiences in Brazil. And maybe even for us going to Brazil, because obviously we're from Europe or people coming from America, they probably will enjoy Brazil and see how wonderful it is. But if you are a black Brazilian or Afro-Brazilian, your experience will be much different. So I wanted to kind of shed light on that.
So going back to what was discovered, has it been preserved? There is some kind of, you know, architectural or historical record of the slaves that were there?
Yeah, yeah. There was of the mass grave that I mentioned. There's been some archaeological studies. This is a bit of a tongue twister, and they've been trying to find out not only how many people were buried. I think it's in excess of like maybe 300,000 skeletons they found as well. And on top of that, there's been some documentaries that, as a result of this this mass graves that they found, there was a documentary that was produced called DNA Africa, where they found a number of prominent black Brazilians, and they tried to trace their heritage and things like that for people to kind of find out where their ancestral roots are. And then some of those people, like one of a famous Brazilian actor called Zezé Mota, she found out her ancestral roots were linked to the Yoruba people. So then she's trying Nigeria. So now she's trying to make, to try and visit Nigeria to kind of reconnect with her African heritage and her roots.
Staying in Africa, because we mentioned it earlier in the program, the Brazilian architecture that is present in Benin. This is something you've covered in your book, isn't it?
That mosque which you showed was, of course, the Shita Bay Mosque, currently situated in Lagos. And the result of those mosques or those architecture was after the famous slave revolts which occurred in 1835, which was led by a number of West African Muslims, primarily from Yoruba and Hausa, the ethnic tribe. Once the revolt was squashed, and a lot of those people, a lot of the black Africans that revolted were transported back to Africa. And a number of them, they started, obviously because they were Muslim, they started to build mosques. And the mosque that they built was in the form of, the architecture was in the form of like the churches in Brazil, because it's the same style. So even if you go to Brazil, like the Shita Bay Mosque is very similar to like a lot of the churches in Brazil today. And that's because of, I think it's called the Baroque style. It's a very similar style kind of thing. So.
If you had to say how important it is to make these connections, to join these dots, to understand the legacy of black people, of black Muslims in the world today, how important would you say that was?
I think it's very important. I think it's very important because it's very inspirational as well. And again, when we're talking about the contributions that black people have made and Muslims have made to history, especially for black people, it's not just slavery. I mean, many people are not aware of, even when people think about the black, when did the black contribution, when people think about Brazil and black people, they think of slavery in terms of when it first started. But there's even reports of Mansa Musa's brother who travelled to the Americas even before the Europeans. So when I think of the African connection with Brazil or the Muslim connection with Brazil, it preceded the Europeans. Because, like I said, Mansa Musa's brother, there's a report that he travelled to the Americas and landed in the northeast of Brazil called Recife. So it shows that our history and our heritage is something that should be celebrated, and we should learn about it. And obviously it can inspire us to kind of achieve great things or whatever fields that we're working in.
Final question. Yeah. That last journey that when you found out, because I know you're of Nigerian heritage, aren't you? And when you find out there's a Nigerian heritage linked to Brazilian heritage, how did it make you feel?
Yeah, it made me very proud, to be honest, because like I mentioned in the book, and I also talk about in the documentary, just walking in the streets even of Rio and of Bahia, I felt I was in some parts of Nigeria, and I saw more people that resembled the way I look at my family than I would in London, unless maybe I'm in Peckham or something. To be honest, I think even just as a Nigerian, even as an African or a person of African descent, you will feel a sense of pride because you're seeing so many people that look like you, and even their mannerisms and their customs is very similar. So I would definitely encourage, people of African descent and Muslims as well to travel to Brazil and you enjoy it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Habeeb, thank you very much. Illuminating the Blackness, that's the name of your book, inshallah. You can get that in the shops. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. We've come now to the end of the programme. Thanks to all my guests for coming on and to you at home for watching. You can catch up online with #AfricaThisWeek, IC, and catch some of our previous episodes on islamchannel.tv. Now, Hausa communities living in Lagos have brought a traditional combat sport known as Dambe from the north of the country to the streets of the capital. With one arm wrapped around a rope, the fighters face off while the audience waits to see which fighter will be the first to touch the ground with a part of the body and lose. We'll leave you the scenes of this ancient sport. We'll see you next week.